So by now, you've already heard about the DZO Vespid Prime Kit, the first set of lenses that came out from DZO that kind of broke the market, if you will, when it comes to cinema glass. Now, the Vespid 2s came out recently, and the price has changed on the Vespid Prime Kit 1. They've dropped from $11.99 to $12.99 per lens down to $7.99 per lens. And that changes things. This kind of creates this natural conflict between, do you get the Vespid Prime 2s or do you get the Vespid Prime 1s? Now, I thankfully have been able to use both the Vespid Prime 2s and the Vespid Prime 1s, and shout out to Adorama for making that connection with DZO. As always, this is an honest and transparent, buyer-friendly, focused review where we kind of just talk about the lenses, how I've used them in real life, and if they're going to stack up to whether, what you need in your kit. As always, I try to provide enough information for you to make an educated decision. So these were sent out by Adorama, but again, there's no bias or anything like that. This is just my personal take on how well these work. So let's jump into it. So the kit that I have is the 7 kit, or the 7 lens kit from DZO Vespid Prime 1. So there's 3 different kits that you can get. There's a 5 lens kit, there's a 7 lens kit, and then there's a 9 lens kit. The kit that I have is 16, 25, 35, 50, 75, 100, and 125 millimeters. And this is a full frame T2.1 PL mount lens kit. So that's pretty much everything that you need to shoot whatever you want. And so the conversation is no longer about like, are they good for the price, right? Because these have almost went half of what they used to be. They've dropped down to $7.99 per lens, and the 7 lens kit that I have is less than $5,200. So this is now a practical entry into full frame cinema grade lenses that offer extraordinary value. And there's a lot of reviews on this. There's a lot of reviews on these lenses and how well they are, how good they are, going back a couple years. So this is not what that video is. It's kind of in 2026, where do they sit, right? And let's talk about that. When I got these, I was like kind of bummed because I had the Vespid 2s first, right? And so I came back down to the Vespid Prime 1 kit. And so mentally I was kind of like, dang, I had the new ones and I'm going back to the first one. But immediately when I first started using these, the first thing I noticed is that there is a pop of color to these. There is a lot more character to these. And so then I went back to like the conversations when the Vespid 2s came out. A lot of people that had already had the Vespid 1s were saying that they had a little bit more character and that the Vespid 2s were a little bit more clinical. And I would agree with that. And so the conversation changed for me. It wasn't anymore, that the Vespid 2s were newer and they were the better lenses. It was more along the lines of, what were the differences and how do they complement each other? Because these are very similar, but they're also very different at the same time in the way that they look. There is more saturation. There is more character right out of the box of these, just with a basic, Gen 5 to extended video, or Gen 5 to video LUT on my Blackmagic cameras. This is just giving a really nice pop of color and saturation. Now, I didn't notice the big difference in the aperture, right? Because we're talking T-stops. We're not talking f-stops with your photography lenses. We're talking T-stops. And so 1.9 versus 2.1, etc., is a very thin depth of field for, being wide open with the aperture standpoint. And using manual lenses, you have to be more focused on the decisions that you're making, how you're setting up your shot, your framing and things like that. Whereas with the autofocus lenses at a 1.4 on a Sony lens, you don't have to focus on that. The autofocus is gonna snap on to your target and stuff like that. And so you don't really feel that much. Whereas with the manual lenses, you have to be more decision oriented as far as the way that you're shooting. With that being said, I often don't shoot wide open with manual lenses. I usually sit around that 2.4, 2.8, the 4 range because of the very thin depth of field from a T-stop versus an f-stop. And so that's the very interesting thing, that I thought there was going to be like, 1.9 and 2.1, I'm going to notice that right away. And I really didn't. But that's the technical side of it, right? From the T-stops, etc. But let's talk about the feeling, right? The biggest thing that I noticed and the difference in the way that I felt using these. Don't get me wrong, the Vespid 2s, if you go back and watch that video, and I'll put it here, watch it at the end of this video. I love the Vespid 2s. They gave me such a look right out of the box that I fell in love with. But I will say that the Vespid ones, the Vespid Prime Kit 1, they give a different feel. They give that, and when I say vintage, I'm thinking like 90s, 2000s feel. I'm thinking My Girl, I'm thinking Bridge to Terabithia. I'm thinking those type of movies is the feeling that I get right out of the box with these. I filmed at the beginning of this video, I did a little segment, that I recorded for the beginning of this movie, beginning of this video review, and there's no lighting in that. Like, there's no controlled lighting. That is the lighting that's coming through the windows in the living room, in the kitchen area, etc. I'm just filming the kids. It's March Madness. The dogs are going from different spot to spot throughout the house as they normally do. And just adding just a clean, basic LUT, the Black Magic LUT to that, it just looks magical. There's saturation, it's soft, it's cinematic feeling. You can add contrast and things like that and get your own look. And somebody that's learning still, like myself, I still feel really proud of the thing that I was able to create with these lenses. And it's a different look than if I was to shoot that same thing with my Sony bodies and some of my G Master lenses. It's a completely different feel. Whereas the Sony G Master might have been like, oh man, that's kind of cool, they're hanging out. Whereas the Vespid Prime Kit makes it feel like the beginning of one of those 2000s movies. So let's talk about real world use, right? I am primarily freelance sports videography, sports photography, and then I do talking heads and interviews and different things like that. Not a lot of like big major commercial work, so I'm more of a freelance run and gun type person, right? And so the biggest thing for these, I used these recently for a basketball tournament, and it was my son joining this Under Armour team, and it's his first time back with the team. He actually used to play with them a while back, but I wanted to shoot one of the first big tournaments, using these lenses, and kind of tell more of a story. So the trade-off with these type of lenses versus your typical setup that I would typically use, which is like my FX30, my Sony a7S III, and some of my Tamron or my Sony lens, my G Master lenses, etc., is that there's a little bit more preparation with these, right? I know that I can get a better story and a better look and more feel, right? And as a videographer, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a feel to these lenses that you can get that you typically wouldn't be able to get with kind of like some of my Sony stuff. Excitement, action, good transitions and all of that stuff with my Sony bodies, for sure. But with these, they require, they give you a little bit more feel, but the trade-off is that they require a lot more preparation. And so the nice thing about this kit is that they're all the same size, the same, distance, pretty much the same weight. So if you are using these on a run and gun setup like I was, which was my Pixis 6K, or if you're using like a gimbal setup or something like that, because they're all the same size, you can slide them on and off. So even if I was using a manual follow focus, which you would have to use for sports versus like something wireless or something like that, it's on and off really quickly. And for basketball, I just took my 50 and 125 and ended up just using the 50 pretty much the whole time because I was kind of just shooting like little moments. I wasn't like making a highlight reel. I just wanted moments of him playing with the team and stuff like that so that I could produce something later. And so that's what you're seeing. And I loved using these on that setup. Which makes it okay because they kind of sit in between. If these were different sizes, lengths, and weights, it would be hard to pack them. It would be hard to travel with them. It would be hard to switch them in between those shots. So that is an uncommon way to use them. But because of the way that they're built and the way that they're set, all the same sizes and weights for the most part, they're able to be used that way. Before we jump into the market shift with the Vespid IIs entering and other lens manufacturers, etc., let's talk about whether or not these have limitations. My personal opinion, I don't think that lenses or glass has limitations. I've always thought that you pick the right tool for the job, right? And so I would say the perfect comparison for these are the Vespid IIs and the Vespid Is. The Vespid IIs have 1.9, so they're a little bit faster, they're a little bit more clinical, etc. These are T2.1, a little bit slower, but they have a little bit more character, a little softer as far as like the look and stuff like that, etc. With that being said, I consider real glass or good glass like these to be like paintbrushes, right? As an artist, right? You're going to pick the right paintbrush. So if you need those delicate, detailed lines, you may go with the Vespid II kit, right? Because they're a little bit more clinical, a little bit more clean, a little bit more corporate, right? But if you want to really make an Andy Warhol and have a lot of just dazzling art, you might go for the T2.1s, Vespid Prime kits, because you want more rawness, you want more emotion, you want more feel, right? There's even the new Arcana 3 anamorphic lens set that just released for around $3,000, where you got an anamorphic set. You may even want to go with the Arles Luster, which is their higher quality lenses that's going to compete with a little bit higher caliber lens, right? But at the end of the day, I feel like when a lens performs really well, like these do, don't get me wrong, there are definitely some lenses that are not good and they don't perform well. They're wobbly or different stuff like that. They don't produce really good images. That's different. But with these, where we're talking about a set of lenses that have been tried and true and people have talked about them and reviewed them very well, this is more like, what paintbrush do you need? So now let's talk about the marketplace and how the Vespid IIs have entered and what that means for these and maybe your decision as you move forward. So for me, the market shift between the Vespid IIs and the Vespid Prime 1s is not that they compete. I think these are compatible with each other and I think they complement each other really well. As an example, I would say if you're shooting a corporate video, you can use either one of these lenses, but depending on that corporate environment may determine which set of lenses you use. It's a law firm, suit and tie, right? Everybody's all of that, right? You may go with the Vespid IIs because they are a little bit more clinical. They're a little bit more clean aesthetic, if you will. Software consulting agency, Vespid Prime 1s, there's a little bit more feel to it. There's more color. There's more, energy in that shot. Both of them look exceptionally amazing. I love both of the lens kits, but I will tell you that they complement each other in that for the software environment, you might go with the Vespid 1s. For the suit and tie law environment, you might go with the Vespid 2s, but both of them are completely capable of shooting either just because they are that good. So the biggest proposition for you, the biggest value proposition for you is that these dropped $500 within the last 3 months. They used to be $12.99, now they're down to $7.99. For the most part, you can get 7 of their lenses at $7.99. I think the 90 macro and then the 12mm wide is at $11.99 or $12.99 respectively. Now with that being said, 5 kit, 7 kit, 9 lens kit, from 12 all the way to 125 with a 90 macro in there. And these have really good, focal distance as well. So that's the nice thing about these. You don't necessarily need a macro, but with that being said, you have a lot of opportunity to shoot whatever you want. So this is a kit that you can get that you don't necessarily grow out of. Typically that's the case when you think budget, I'm gonna start with these and then I'm gonna move on to something better. That's not the case with these. These are a full-on set that you can buy if you're brand new to the cinema world, that you can start your career and keep. And then if you already are in your career, this is one of the best practical purchases that you can buy at this cost. Make, no ands, ifs, buts about it, right? If you have shot with these, let me know your thoughts. Put them in the comment section below. Are you still using them? Have you moved on? Have you tried the Vespid IIs? Kind of share your thoughts with the community below as well. I will put the link in the description below. That will be an affiliate link to Adorama. Thank you again to Adorama for sending this out. If you do decide to purchase these, that will help me personally. But the best thing that you can do if you did enjoy today's content and you're new to the channel and or you want to see more reviews like this, please hit that subscribe button below and join the Cosey Coalition. But as always, stay cozy in that crazy world and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.